Okay. All right, guys. Tonight we're going to start Unit 3. Unit 3 looks at learning and memory. And what we're going to look at specifically tonight is one type of learning called classical conditioning. So let's get into that. So classical conditioning is a type of learning in which a stimulus acquires the capacity to evoke a response that was originally evoked by another stimulus. This process was first described in 1903 by Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist who did Nobel Prize-winning research on digestion. I'll show you a quick video of Pavlov.
Prize-winning research on digestion.
Here we go.
He did groundbreaking work on associative in Petersburg, Russia.
Here we go.
Born in 1849, Ivan Pavlov spent the vast majority of his life in St. Petersburg, Russia. After conducting prize-winning research on digestion, he did groundbreaking work on associative learning. His work led to the discovery of the conditioned reflex.
Okay. Pavlov was studying the role of saliva in the digestive process of dogs when he stumbled upon what he called a psychic reflex. His subjects were dogs restrained in a harness in an arrangement similar to what you're looking at in this diagram. The dog's saliva was collected by means of a surgically implanted tube in the salivary gland. Pavlov would present meat powder to a dog and then collect the resulting saliva. As his research progressed, Pavlov noticed that the dogs accustomed to the procedure would start salivating before the meat powder was presented. For instance, they would salivate in response to the click of the device that was used to present the meat powder. So Pavlov was intrigued by this unexpected finding, and he decided to investigate further. To clarify what was happening, he paired the presentation of the meat powder with various stimuli. For example, in some experiments, he paired the presentation of the meat powder with a particular tone. After the tone and the meat powder had been presented together a number of times, the tone was presented alone. What happened was very interesting. I'm going to click on the tuning fork to show you how the dog responded to hearing just the tone. The dog responded by salivating to the sound of the tone alone. So the question is, what is so significant about a dog salivating when a tone is presented? Let's talk about that question. The key here is that the tone started out as a neutral stimulus. That is, it did not originally produce the response of salivation. However, Pavlov changed that by pairing the tone with the stimulus, the meat powder, that did produce the salivation. Through this process, the tone acquired the capacity to trigger the response of salivation. What Pavlov had demonstrated was how learned associations, which are viewed as the basic building blocks of the learning process, are formed by events in the organism's environment. So let's talk a little bit about the terminology that you need to know in classical conditioning. Excuse me. Examples of classical conditioning are usually diagrammed as shown above. Let's look at the elements in each one of these different boxes and the special vocabulary associated with classical conditioning. The bond Pavlov noted between the meat powder and the salivation was a natural, unlearned association. It did not have to be created through conditioning, meaning that if you present meat powder to a hungry dog, it will salivate, and nobody has to teach the dog to make that response. So therefore, the meat powder and the relationship between the meat powder and the salivation is called an unconditioned association. Best way to remember unconditioned, think of unlearned. It's an unlearned relationship. The meat powder naturally produces salivation in dogs. So, an unconditioned stimulus, or UCS, is a stimulus that evokes an unconditioned response without previous conditioning. In Pavlov's experiment, the meat powder was the unconditioned stimulus. An unconditioned response, or UCR, is an unlearned response to an unconditioned stimulus that occurs without previous conditioning. In Pavlov's experiments, salivation was the unconditioned response. Unconditioned because it's an unlearned response to an unlearned stimulus, which is the meat powder. In contrast, the link between the tone and salivation was established through conditioning or learning. It is therefore called a conditioned association. So the relationship between the tone and the salivation is conditioned. The relationship between the meat powder and the salivation is unconditioned. A conditioned stimulus, or CS, is a previously neutral stimulus that has, through conditioning, acquired the capacity to evoke a conditioned response. In Pavlov's experiments, the tone was the conditioned stimulus. The conditioned response, or CR, is a learned reaction to a conditioned stimulus that occurs because of previous conditioning. Classical conditioned responses, such as the salivation of Pavlov's dogs, have traditionally been characterized as reflexes. These responses are said to be elicited or drawn forth because most of them are relatively automatic or involuntary. Think about the relationship if someone blows a puff of air into your eye. The puff of air would be the unconditioned stimulus, and your blinking your eye would be the unconditioned response. So, a trial in classical conditioning consists of any presentation of a stimulus or a pair of stimuli. So, let's check your understanding of the concepts that we just discussed. So, click on the unconditioned stimulus in this classical conditioning diagram. So, the unconditioned stimulus would be the meat powder. Then click on the conditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus, remember, a stimulus is a thing that produces a response. So the conditioned stimulus would be the tone. Click on the conditioned response. Now here's the key. The unconditioned response and the conditioned response are the same. The question is what's causing it to happen. So in this diagram, the conditioned response would always be the salivation. So here's a couple of examples. Bill's cat Lulu is fed only canned food. The cans are always open with a can opener that makes a distinctive noise. After a while, Lulu starts to salivate whenever she hears the can opener. We're going to drag and drop the key elements from this example into the appropriate boxes in the classical conditioning diagram. So the cat food, unconditioned stimulus. Sound of the can opener, conditioned stimulus. Salivation, conditioned response. How about this one? Sam is 3 years old. One night his parents build a fire in their fireplace. The fire spits out a large ember that hits Sam and burns him. A week later, when Sam's parents light another fire, Sam becomes upset and fearful. Drag and drop the key elements from this example into their appropriate boxes of the classical conditioning diagram. So the fear would be the response, conditioned and unconditioned. Pain from the burn, unconditioned stimulus. Fire in the fireplace, conditioned stimulus. So, in laboratory experiments on classical conditioning, researchers have generally worked with simple reflexes. One favorite subject is the eye blink, which is an unconditioned response to the unconditioned stimulus of a puff of air delivered to the eye. So, I'm going to click on the button to demonstrate the reflex. So, you click on the button, and puff of air causes the person to blink. Puff of air, unconditioned stimulus, eye blink, unconditioned response. If the puff of air is paired several times with the sound of a buzzer, the buzzer will become a conditioned stimulus that triggers the eye blink response. So let's talk a little bit about classical conditioning in everyday life. So in everyday life, classical conditioning regulates a diverse array of responses. Prominent among them are the emotional responses such as fear and anxiety. For example, if you cringe when you hear the sound of a dentist drill, your response is due to classical conditioning. In this case, the pain you've experienced from the dental drilling is the unconditioned stimulus. This pain has been paired with the sound of the drill, which has become a conditioned stimulus, eliciting your cringe, which is the conditioned response. Advertisers often take advantage of classical conditioning. Advertisers routinely pair their products with unconditioned stimuli that elicits pleasant emotions. So the most common strategy is to present a product with an attractive person. So in a sense, what you're doing is you're associating the product with the person. Advertisers hope that these pairings will make products condition stimuli that evoke good feelings. Classical conditioning can also influence physiological processes. For example, classical conditioning procedures can lead to immunosuppression, a decrease in production of antibodies. In a typical study, rats are injected with a drug that chemically causes immunosuppression. This injection is the unconditioned stimulus. At the same time as the injection, the rats are given an unusual tasting liquid to drink. This liquid is the conditioned stimulus. After the chemical immunosuppression is ended, some of the rats are re-exposed to the conditioned stimulus by given the unusual tasting solution. Measurements of antibody production indicate that rats exposed to the conditioned stimulus show a reduced immune response. Okay, and that's the end of video 1. I have another video on classical conditioning that we're going to look at.